Welcome to this week's Let's Talk Paranormal, and my special studio guest today has dedicated more than 30 years of his life to Vedic astrology, an East Indian form of astrology known as the science of life. My guest today, Jeffrey Armstrong, is the author of this captivating book, God, Goddess, the Astrologer. And in it, he explains why you are not the sun sign that you think you are, that God has both female and male aspects, and scientific proof of karma and reincarnation. Thank you for being with us here today, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And it's an honor to have you. I was just mentioning Vedic astrology as being the science of life. What does that mean exactly?
Well, actually, it's called Jyotish, which means the science of light. And it's because light is coming from all of the planetary bodies. So time is measured by the passage of light over space, or light over distance. Just like in physics, where we measure everything by the speed of light.
Okay.
So everything that's happening in our life is measured by light, and life is dependent on light.
Okay.
So astrology, therefore, is called the science of light, because life is dependent on light.
Okay. And how old is Vedic astrology?
Well, the Vedic culture and the Indian knowledge is at least documented to 8,000 to 10,000 years old. And one of the amazing things about Vedic astrology is that they have documented the wobble of the earth for at least that long to an extreme degree of accuracy, much more accurate than the Greeks knew, for example.
Right.
So this shows that the astronomy in those days was as sophisticated. The only more sophisticated astronomy has been NASA in recent years to improve upon the calculations done in the Vedic astrology.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I notice in your book that on page 18, you say Carl Jung suspected it is deeper than psychology.
Yes, he actually used to say you can know more with the horoscope than with the stethoscope. That was his saying.
That's interesting.
And he understood that everything in the universe has archetypes, which means there's an original form that exists before us, and we're shaped around those forms.
Right.
So the planets are an original energy, and then we all have some of that energy within us. Just like we're made out of stardust that's fallen to the earth, so we're really all made out of stardust. So in a similar way, we're all made of energetic contributions from all the planets in our solar system.
Right. What got you interested in astrology, Vedic astrology especially?
Well, actually, I was a psychology student when I first got interested, and I did an experiment to see if I could guess the signs of people using the normal descriptions. I was able to do it very accurately. So then I studied it, found a teacher eventually, and was able to see that through the horoscope. A good way to think of it is think of a horoscope, which is the picture of the sky at the moment of your birth, as a blueprint of the mind and body that you have, so that at the moment of birth, there was actually in that, like your gene code, a blueprint of what we see in front of us.
Right.
And when I saw that that could be used to describe what the person would look like, I realized an astrologer can tell, for example, when I talk to someone over the telephone, if they give me their birth information, I can tell them what they look like.
Isn't that amazing how that happens? I mean, how are you able to do that from the pattern of the stars?
Well, because the universe is made out of elements, and they're really simple. In Vedic astrology, it's earth, water, fire, air, and space, the five elements of our experience.
Okay.
Earth is the solid part, water is the liquid part, fire is the burning part, air is the subtle part, and space is the surrounding part. So our bodies are made up of varying amounts of that. If somebody has a very slender body, they're mostly air. If somebody has a medium build, mostly muscles, they're a fire body. If somebody has a heavier body or more curvaceous, they're water and earth, which means everybody's body is being made up out of these basic five elements. So in astrology, the air signs, fire signs, water signs, earth signs tell us the elements that made up the body. If you see the elements in the chart, you have to see them in the body.
Right. The interesting thing is that I was speaking to a scientist a few weeks ago, And he could not understand, he was an astronomer, how you could actually form a horoscope from the stars. He couldn't understand that the stars actually, you take it as frozen. He said everything's moving. Everything's constantly moving.
Right.
What would you say to that, Jeffrey?
Well, think of it this way. Science took a certain direction a few years back. In fact, it's kind of interesting that our modern science is still traumatized by their early beginnings with the Catholic Church at a time when the Catholic Church was persecuting and killing scientists. So science as we know it separated from divine subjects, thinking that it was dangerous to mix them, and they were a little angry at the church. So science as we have known it has thought you were either scientific or spiritual. In India, that was never the case. They thought you could be both, and they never persecuted people who tried to understand the universe through science. They said they were just one continuum of understanding. So this is closer to where quantum physics and other things are taking us now, that many things that used to sound like ancient religion sound more like quantum physics now. So scientists are used to being opposed to things like astrology on principle, but they haven't studied it. They're just opposed to it on principle. That's why someone like Carl Jung was interesting, because he studied it, and he was a psychologist. So he called what he did acausal synchronicity. He said, I've observed the correlation between the movements of the planets and movements of things on Earth as a scientist. I don't know why it happens, so it's acausal because I'm not sure what's causing it, but I know it happens, so it's synchronicity. There's a synchronicity between things happening here and things moving up there. That's science.
Right.
To study cause and effect. So he called it acausal synchronicity. So for a scientist, that's a pretty good way to do it. For a spiritually minded person who's willing to look deeper and doesn't have scientific preconceptions blocking them, then if you see, after 1,000 horoscopes, that 95% of the time somebody can tell what a person looks like before they see him, then you either have to say they're remote viewing or that astrology works. Neither one of those jive with science as we understand it. But both are actually possible anyway.
Right, and it is the importance of synchronicity and not coincidence?
Or chance.
Or chance.
Because it's provable in the same way anything else is, through empiric observation.
Right.
But science hasn't funded this yet, so until they do, until someone funds astrology a little better, then we can't make scientific studies that have the same power as a medical study of 10,000 people. But those days are coming. And soon it will happen. People like myself are pushing to have that happen.
Wow. Something I find really interesting in your book is that you mention that the whole Western astrology is 23 degrees off.
Correct.
From Vedic.
Not only that, but from the actual star positions.
Right. Could you explain, Jeffrey, because apparently we are not the birth sign
that we think.
We think.
I know. And if this is traumatic for everyone, I like to call this a sign change operation. It only hurts for a minute. And if you're a Leo, I know you have to sell all your t-shirts and coffee mugs, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh my gosh.
But the Leos all become Cancers. The Cancers all become Geminis. In other words, everyone's actual birth chart is not what the Western astrologers have been saying. Now here's why. Think of the Earth as going around the sun. So one of the movements of the Earth is it goes around the sun. That's our year.
Right.
The other movement is the Earth is inclined on its axis and it turns once in a day. And so we see things rise in the east and set in the west. In actual fact, a different group of stars rises in the east every 2 hours. And astrologers call that your rising sign.
Right.
Because it was rising in the east at the moment of your birth. Now, if there was no other movement of the Earth, the stars, because they're fixed, would always be in the same place at every season. So every time spring came around, the same star would rise up in the east just before the sun. Because the stars are unvarying patterns. So if that was so, then Aries could be the first day of spring always. That's how Western astrology has it, as if Aries begins on March 21st, the spring equinox, and goes for 30 days. But that's not the truth of the sky, because the Earth has one other motion. It wobbles like a gyroscope, and the pole of the Earth wobbles around like this, pointing out to different parts of space, which means we don't always have the same pole star. Right now it's Polaris, and we're about 1 degree off of Polaris.
Okay.
So North and Polaris are pretty close. That only started being true in the 16th century. That's why we had what we call the age of navigation, because in the 16th century you could use the pole star to navigate.
Right.
So as this wobble happens, different stars are present with different seasons. So the seasons precede backwards through the stars,
Right.
and it's called the precession of the equinox.
Right.
Now, 1850 years ago was the last time the first day of spring was with Aries. And we went into the age of Pisces, which, by the way, is why the Pope wears a fisherman's hat and ring, and Jesus was associated with the age of Pisces, and Christianity has
That's
the fish as the
interesting.
symbol.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because
Wow.
they thought, the 3 wise astrologers, that remember the 3 Persian astrologers that came to see
yes,
Jesus?
yeah.
Why were astrologers looking for Jesus? Because they knew the age of Pisces was coming, and they were looking for the prophet for the age of Pisces.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
So we've been in the age of Pisces since then, which means anyone born on March 21st since then is a Pisces.
Right.
Not an Aries. Now, you've heard we might enter the age of Aquarius.
Yes.
Now, we're not there yet, I'm sorry. I know the mugs and t-shirts are done, and it's a bit of a disappointment. But it's another 400 years before we go into the age of Aquarius, okay?
So there's quite a wait.
It's because of this wobble. So when it happens, the first day of spring will not be Aries, and it won't be Pisces anymore either.
Right.
It'll be 30 degrees of Aquarius, and then 29, 28, and it takes 2,160 years for one sign to go across the first day of spring.
Okay.
So a person born 1,850 years ago on the first day of spring was an Aries.
Right.
Right now, they're a Pisces. In 400 years, they'll be an Aquarius. So your sun sign changes, not your sun sign, but what the sun signs are changes over time.
So that's going to upset the balance big time.
Well, it means all the horoscopes done by Western astrologers are off from the stars by 23 degrees.
Well, let's take a look at the chart, Jeffrey, that you have in your book. And maybe the audience can have a look at this. It'll probably up there for just a few seconds. So you'd have to get Jeffrey's book to actually see the information of what Jeffrey is putting forward there.
You see, it says sidereal, which means the star positions.
Sidereal.
And the Western version is called tropical because it follows the seasons instead of the stars.
So is there a certain percentage or degree that you would need to be in to remain as your sign?
Yes, there's 23 degrees of difference right now, and a sign is 30 degrees. So if you were in the later degrees of the sign, you would stay in the same one.
Right.
Think of it as the last 7 days of the sign, you probably stay the same.
Okay.
In the first 23 days of the sign, it would be the one previous.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Now, is it possible to combine Western with Vedic?
Yes and no.
Why is that?
No, because you can't be an Aries and a Pisces simultaneously. If your sun is in Aries, it makes you a fire being. If your sun is in Pisces, it makes you a water being.
Water being.
And a water being will have a different kind of body than a fire being, and a different temperament and a different way of acting. So you can't simultaneously have your sun in Aries and your sun in Pisces. But if Saturn, for example, was with your sun at birth, it's true in both systems. But in the one case, you'd have it in Aries, and in the other case, you'd have it in Pisces.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference for actually understanding the person. But there's a similarity in that Saturn and Sun together would mean one thing in Vedic and one thing in Western, and pretty much the same thing.
Right.
So let's say there's a percentage of similarity, but then a very big difference because almost all the signs and planets change.
Right. So it might mean then that your personality would remain the same?
Well, hopefully your personality would remain the same and your horoscope would be
Yeah.
different.
Right.
Meaning you won't change, but you'll find yourself better described by the Vedic chart than by the Western chart, and you cannot then predict the body type from the Western chart because all the elements will be wrong.
Right.
So if you have lots of water in your chart, you'll have a heavier body. Lots
Right.
of earth, a heavier body. Lots of air, a lighter body. And the signs change in the Western to the Vedic, then you won't be able to connect with that.
Right. Because Vedic plays a big part in that role of body types and the ingestion of certain foods for your body type.
Well, the astrology is connected to what's called Ayurvedic medicine.
Yes.
So for anyone who studied yoga or is a little bit looked into Eastern philosophy, the yoga is an attempt to connect with your true self and find its source. Ayurvedic medicine is an attempt to live in harmony with nature, and Vedic astrology is the science of your karma, or the cause and effect of what you did in your previous life, and how it's coming forward still to make your current body and some of your current reality.
Let's talk about that, Jeffrey, because that was one of my next questions I wanted to ask you. How does karma play a role in this?
Good question.
How does it play the role?
Well, think of it this way. If the soul is eternal, which is the basic premise of astrology, then who we really are is a being who cannot die. As if we're not humans having a spiritual experience, we're souls having a human experience.
That's right, I agree. I agree.
So that means we don't really ever die. What we call death is leaving your body. It's as if this is your car and you have to leave it at a certain point because it doesn't work anymore. If your car didn't work, you'd get out of it, walk away, and then go get a new one. That's called reincarnation.
That's brilliant.
You just get another car.
Right.
It's your vehicle.
Right.
So the thing is, the material world works on cause and effect. If you ask any scientist, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Therefore, since everything here is cause and effect, and the soul is eternal, when the soul comes and acts in the material world, everything it does gets a reaction. But the reaction doesn't happen right away. Like if you work, you get your paycheck 2 weeks later.
Right.
They don't give you the money right away.
Right.
If you invest, you get your money 10 years later, not right away. So there's a delay between karma, the doing, and karma, the reaction. And doing is investing. And so the horoscope is the actual account balance of the cause and effect that we've been creating. And the horoscope tells the astrologer about the karma that is trying to catch up with us, that's trailing along behind us.
And we don't know what that karma is until it's that time to experience it.
The astrologer knows it in advance.
Yes.
But the person would otherwise not see it coming.
Could it be that we knew about it before we were born? We knew what karma we were going to have in this life, but forgotten?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. The way yoga talks about this is that when the soul leaves one body, they're taken to a judge who acts on behalf of the divine and runs a movie for us, which is our life that we've just had. Makes commentary, tells us this was good, this was not so good, that was against the law, this is with the law, just like Judge Judy in the courts. This is the kind of cosmic Judge Judy. And we're sitting there listening and going, okay, I see that, I see that. So at the end, there's a kind of a judgment. It says, okay, so this is your karma for this, and this is your karma for this, and this is your karma for this, and you're going to be given this body and these parents. And we go, queue up, get in the body, and then when we're born, the trauma makes us go unconscious and we forget, because we're in a baby body now, so we don't have, the brain's not working to remember. That's why some people wake up and do remember past lives, because they're buried there inside. The residue of the past life is buried inside of us, but the memory of it is not on the surface.
Very interesting.
Astrology can look into that as a kind of scope, so it's a horoscope for looking into past karma and what the planets are doing right now to trigger that.
Right, and you mentioned 3 different types of karma in your book.
Yes. Want to hear about that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, one kind is old karma that's so old it's about to be delivered and there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay.
I call it the pizzas you've already ordered.
Okay, the pizzas you've already ordered.
The truck has left the building.
Okay.
There's nothing you can do to make them take it back. So it's something you did a long time ago. The body we have is that. Our parents were that. Our brothers and sisters. The schools we went to when we were young. It just happened to us.
Okay.
Things that just happened to you is old destiny karma. Maybe 20% of karma is that. So anything that happens in your life that you had no control over, destiny karma. You created it.
Okay.
And it landed, but you can't remember when you created it, and you couldn't have stopped it from happening. Then the second kind of karma is where you're using free will, and the karma is an attitude that's limiting you. Now, we all know that we have limiting beliefs and attitudes.
Right.
Well, if you have a limiting belief or attitude, you could change that with free will, but you'll have to make an effort to do it, or else your limiting belief will keep reproducing itself. We see this all the time. Someone has a scar or a limit of some kind,
Right.
and they keep making it happen again and again, attracting it into their life. But if they really worked on it and changed that area, then they wouldn't make that same pattern happen again and
They
again.
could push through it.
They could. So the karma at that stage is a seed of karma in your mind.
Right.
So seedling karma doesn't have to happen. You could change it with free will.
Right. And what I find interesting is that you mentioned you can actually eliminate karma through yoga.
Through various spiritual practices. And
How
all
does
genuine,
that work?
well, all genuine spiritual practices clean the mind. Imagine the mind is like a mirror. And if the mirror was clear, you could see the soul. But if the mirror gets dusty, it distorts the light that's coming from the soul, and it makes distorted images. So the idea of spiritual practice is that by doing various things, you clean the mirror of the mind, and all those misconceptions and old areas of blockage are removed, kind of like truth decay.
Right. Okay.
You're having truth decay, and if you get your teeth cleaned, then it's cleaner. So we have consciousness that gets covered over with old events, and if you cleaned those off, you'd be clear again. And in that clarity, you wouldn't be forced to behave in limiting ways. So astrologers do two things. They look at the chart, like a doctor would look at your body and diagnose it, and then they make a prescription that why don't you try doing this thing or this thing or this thing to develop in your limited area. And the horoscope shows where those limiting areas might be.
Right.
Because we made them and brought them in.
Yeah, and people have had success from doing that.
Oh, all the time.
Tremendous
Tremendous
success.
amount.
Yeah.
Because it's just a way of knowing yourself.
Right.
But it gives you insider information, and it's more objective than someone's subjective opinion or even just psychoanalysis or things like that, which usually just look at your parents this lifetime. But you see, if we have a history of 100 lifetimes where we've been accumulating, we have no idea who we were in those previous lives. But if we're eternal, we were someone. We had a different car, we were driving around in this other car, and whatever you did, if you got tickets in that other car, they're still following you.
Right. The truth is, Jeffrey, we're bringing a whole lot of baggage into this life because we are a combination of our mother and our father and who we are supposed to be.
Plus who we were for the last 100
And
lives.
who we were.
So we have lots of surprises
Isn't
in
it
there.
any wonder we're all confused and frustrated?
Well, especially
know?
because we're trying to explain everything that happens in the present moment by what we're doing in the present moment. But that would imply that there was no past.
Right.
But there is a past.
Right.
And so you're right, I call it suitcases of karma
Right.
that we bring in with us. And
Okay.
when we land at a person's home, our parents' home, they put our suitcases of karma in the basement. And when we grow up and leave the house, we open the suitcases and out comes our destiny. Unless we look in with astrology and say, how much of this could be changed?
Right.
How much of this could we modify?
Right.
And where are the planets moving? So the third kind of karma is the planets and their movements are pushing on us from a particular angle, and that's called transit.
Right.
Transit means the planet is going around and it pushes on us differently from time to time. Sometime in our marriage, sometimes in our job, sometimes in our body, sometimes in our mind.
And that's directing you to be the person that you're supposed to be, or doing what you are supposed to be doing.
Or it's giving you the reaction to what you did previously, good or
Right.
bad.
Okay.
Some of them feel good, some of them don't feel good.
Okay. You also mentioned, Jeffrey, in your book, scientific proof of reincarnation.
Right.
Could you briefly go into that?
Well, aside from the fact that a great deal of research has been done now, very good scientific research on people who wake up in their body and aren't able to say where they've been before and then go prove it. I have a volume at home this thick of documented cases.
Wow.
But in the horoscope, because through the horoscope you're able to know the person's body type, it means that the body type was planned before the moment of birth, scheduled at the moment of birth, and could be read out of the stars and planets' positions at the moment of birth. So this is scientific. And the whole point is that Otherwise, there's no explanation for all the different ways that we show up. Meaning no just explanation.
An interesting thought that just came through my mind, Jeffrey, if we are planning to come through to this life with a certain amount of karma or through our reincarnation, are we not also preparing for when we exit this life, ready for the next one?
Well, let me give you a metaphor for this. Let's think of the material world as an amusement park. And instead of thinking we're bad for coming here, which Vedic teachings don't say, think that it's okay that we came here. We're not bad. It's on an exploration. We're here on a kind of adventure.
Okay.
And the material world, when we were in the spiritual world, there was a little door, and it said, you must be taller than this penguin to enter the amusement park. We went into the material world.
Okay.
There was a little sign that said, careful, things in the material world get distorted and you may forget who you are.
Right.
So our souls forgot who they were, came inside, reincarnated, forgot why we were here, but why we're here is to go on the rides. So what are the rides? Life experience. We're collecting experience.
Right.
So that's why there's young souls and old souls. If you've only been in the park a little while, you may think, gee, I have a lot of things that I still want to do in the material world. Well, if you feel that way at the moment of death, the material world will say, okay, give them another body. Give them another car because they don't want to leave.
Right.
Whereas, if you get to the point where you've gone on all the rides in the park, you'll know, because you won't have a desire to go on the rides. Someone who gets to that stage wants only enlightenment and higher understanding and wants to be the soul more and more, and they get less and less interest in the park. At a certain point, they get to the exit, and that is called liberation.
Right.
Their soul leaves the park and goes back to the transcendental where they came from.
Amazing.
However many lives we want to stay here, we can stay.
It's our choice.
It's our choice.
It's our choice.
We came to the park voluntarily.
Wow.
And we can leave when we want, but to leave, we have to finish our karma, and then we have to not make more,
Right.
and we have to aim ourselves back to where we came from. That's called yoga.
Right. Fascinating stuff. Sadly, we've run out of time. I do thank Jeffrey for being my guest today. And you can check out Jeffrey on his website, www.jeffreyarmstrong.com, and also on my website, letstalkparanormal.com. We have Jeffrey's information on there. And once again, Jeffrey's book, God, Goddess, the Astrologer. Absolutely amazing read. I recommend it. Until next time, thank you. Bye-bye.